I've got my book open to page 86 in chapter 3, where we're talking about major events and milestones during pregnancy. And just in case you didn't bring one with you, or if you're not going to keep your book, this is for your little file folder that you're putting together. Some stuff to keep handy. So look at page 86 or this handout and tell me what's going on in this prenatal development stage. There you go. Got you, Karis.
Thank you.
What's going on with prenatal development? In the first 12 days, in the first 2 weeks, you go, she doesn't even know she's pregnant. And you know what's kind of sad about that? Anything that's in her bloodstream that can adversely affect the baby can start having an effect in those first 2 weeks. Is it Rachel? Good. I'll give you one of these too. Because probably the biggest thing out of this chapter that I want to talk about is this thing called teratogens. Things that can damage an unborn baby. And right here in these early stages of development, there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong. So a woman who's thinking about getting pregnant should start changing her lifestyle so that she doesn't do anything to damage this baby she's going to conceive. And she probably ought to start eating healthy so that she's giving this little baby that's forming in her all kinds of healthy options, or at least possibilities that will help them grow strong and have a healthy life and not be born with any problems. And by the way, this stuff that's going on in our culture today, these debates that we're having, if you're wondering why this last Supreme Court nominee was so contentious in Washington, does anyone know why? It didn't have as much to do with the person as it had to do with the number of people on the Supreme Court. So that when you look at this chart here, what happens is the courts in America have decided that we need to make a decision about how far along in this process can a woman legally dispose of her child. And the argument from the people who want to extend it further say it's not a person, it's only fetal tissue. And the people who want to limit the abortion argument are the people who are saying, no, this is a living child from these particular places in terms of their development. So knowing about those developmental stages helps you understand where the argument comes from. Here you go. In terms of why they're arguing about after a certain number of weeks, the courts should say that, and states still have that option to say we can limit abortion beyond a certain place, because at that place in their development, we have a viable living person that if they're delivered, they can survive. So if you terminate that pregnancy, then you basically have killed that baby. And so that's why this table from page 86 is important to look at, to kind of get a glimpse of what it is the arguments are about that are pro and anti-abortion, and how people try to make judgments as to when life begins, because there's just a whole bunch of stuff that happens here early on. Well, even weeks 3 to 8, within the first 8 weeks of the little child's growth and development, look at all the things that are going on. So just be aware of how much development happens very early on, and maybe that'll help you understand some of these arguments and debates that we're reading about. What's your name?
Uriah.
All right. Well, there you are. Thanks, Uriah. Okay. Have I marked everybody present in here? If you're here, you ought to get credit for it. On page 87, right in the middle of the page, it says, once the embryo makes contact with the uterine lining, it becomes vulnerable to any toxins that might exist in the mother's bloodstream. For healthy development to proceed, the mother's blood needs to not only be rich in healthy nutrients and oxygen, but also to be free from harmful substances such as alcohol, cocaine, and nicotine. We'll discuss the harmful effects of such substances later in the chapter. Okay, did all of you have a biology class in high school? Did they tell you this? Were you given this information?
Yes, sir.
How many were given that information earlier in life? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So half of you, somebody didn't tell you the whole story, did they? Can you see a reason why someone might like to keep this information under wraps? I mean, when you read this chapter 3 and you look at what's going on here in terms of prenatal development, you can't see what's happening, but all this stuff is going on. Do you think if Planned Parenthood, which they're not planning for you to be a parent, if they were required to give everyone who comes in the front door a little chart like this and say, read this before you sign the papers to abort the baby, that it could make a difference in a person's life? And I just happen to think that sometimes people in our society who are pro-abortion don't want everybody knowing that information. They just don't want them to have that kind of information available. Okay, the teratogen thing is over. Where is that? On page 90? So turn over to page 90, and I'm going to give you a list of those. Just because I want you to have that stuff available. Put it in your file for future reference. If you ever run into somebody who's in a prenatal condition you say, I have some information for you. That you should read so you can be an informed person. And what does page 90 tell us? That there are a lot of drugs that have to do with risk factors. There's a lot of environmental stuff that has to do with risk factors. Maternal diseases. Do any of you, are you familiar with the CDC? The Center for Disease Control, that keeps track of diseases in America?
Yes.
And they talk to us from time to time and tell us that we have an epidemic. There's a threat for a certain kind of disease. Well, were any of you told in high school that sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, are not all that big a deal because there's medication to take care of it? Because the medication doesn't cure it. It just helps with the side effects and the symptoms. And STDs are dangerous for the rest of a woman's life. And every time the Center for Disease Control says we've got another epidemic on our hands, sometimes it's California, sometimes it's New York City, sometimes it's in the Midwest. When you hear them making reports on information they get from doctors that report stuff to them all the time, and they say, we need to do something about it. Well, prevention is the best thing to stop the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. Just simply don't be sexually active and you won't run the risk of picking up these diseases, because they can be very damaging to an unborn child. Stress and age. Do any of you know a woman in her late 30s or early 40s who got pregnant? And guess what they tell them when they go see the doctor? The doctors go, you're too old to be having a baby. It's like, what? I'm telling you, it's amazing what goes on in our world today. But stress. So what does that mean? If you have a friend who's pregnant, do everything you can to keep them from getting stressed about stuff. And what's really sad, in our culture, what stresses a lot of pregnant women out? They don't look as good as they did before they got pregnant. Give me a break. Pregnant women have this glow about them. Mm-hmm. Tell them that when you see them, so they don't get so stressed about it. And then paternal considerations. Studies with rats and mice have shown damage to genetic material in sperm and increased activity levels in offspring. Well, there's a picture on the next page here, I think. Yeah, page 92. Here's a picture of a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. That comes from a mother drinking when she's pregnant. Pretty sad stuff. Pretty sad stuff. So if you know a pregnant woman, if you see a pregnant woman in a store smoking, just walk up to her for the sake of her baby and say, do you know what smoking nicotine does to your unborn child? And if she says no, you say, well, Google it. Just Google, what does nicotine do to my unborn child? And I suppose you could carry your handout with you and say, well, here's a copy of my handout. Read it and see what it does. But you probably won't have one. But understand, a lot of these women were never told that. No one gave them that information. So we ought to do what we can to help the unborn children of the world. Page 98. Critical periods. When is the developing baby most vulnerable to toxins? When organs and structures are forming. When this little baby's organs and their bone structure and body structure are forming, that's when they're most vulnerable to these toxins. When does that happen according to your chart there? When are their bones and
3 to 8 weeks.
that embryonic stage? 3 to 8 weeks? That's pretty scary, isn't it? By the time they start moving around, you say, whoa, we better do something to keep this baby healthy. Whatever you were doing up to that point, you've already had an impact on that unborn child. Page 101 to 104 talks about the stages of birth. I'm smiling when I talk about that because one time when I was in college, actually when I was a student here at Calvary, one of the professors made us watch a film on how to deliver a baby because he said, some of you people are going to become missionaries and you're going to have to know how to do this. And I'm sitting there watching this movie and I'm getting a little dizzy, and the professor walks up and he goes, Tom, he goes, get over by the window and get some fresh air. You're just turning white as a sheet. And I said, okay. And about that time, I kind of went thump. And I went home and told my wife, when you get ready to have a baby, don't wait too long to get to the hospital, because I just fainted watching a film of one being born. Don't do that to me. If you decide to have that baby in a car, I'll pass out at the wheel and you'll be on your own. Because you know what some pregnant mothers do if they wake up in the middle of the night and they're having contractions and they're timing it and they say, well, the doctor said to call him. What's the next thought they have in the middle of the night? You don't know any pregnant women who've talked about that? Here's what they'll say. I don't want to bother the doctor. Yeah? Well, if you don't bother the doctor, Nina, you're going to have a passed out husband on your hands and figuring out how to have that baby by yourself. Get to the hospital. Well, if we go in early, it'll cost more. I'll pay for it later. Just get to the hospital. Make sure you take care of this stuff. And the first baby that we had was born so quickly that she just barely got there in time. So the second one, I said, we're going in early if we have to. And the second one took longer to get here. Well, the Lord has a sense of humor about this stuff. Page 104. So there's not a lot you can do about that except get them to the hospital on time. And so when Nina woke up in the middle of the night and she said, Tom, I'm having contractions. I said, so grab your suitcase, let's get out of here. Well, I don't want to bother the doctor. I'm saying, then I will. I'll call him and bother the doctor because we need to take care of this stuff. And sometimes other people just need to step in and say, I'm going to look out for the welfare of this mother and this baby. Page 104 and 105 talk about becoming a family. And the first part of becoming a family is obviously the parents. Do you know anybody who just decided, I want to have a family? Any woman who said, I want to have a family, but I don't want to be bothered with a husband, so I'll just get pregnant and have a baby. Well, you can have a baby, but the baby won't have a family. You go, what? God didn't intend for babies to be raised by single parents. That was not God's plan. Now, our society says, well, you can make it happen. And you can read books out there that'll say you can be both a mother and a father to a child. You can? No, you can't. And if you're raised by a mother or a father, then you don't have that intact family unit that God intended for you to have. And it does have consequences. Just make a note of that. It does have consequences. And our society says it doesn't matter. It does matter. And do any of you know girls who actually thought if she got pregnant, the guy would marry her? And then once she got pregnant, she found out that he wasn't interested in having responsibility. If a man doesn't want to be responsible for having children, he shouldn't be having sex with a girl, because once the child is born, doesn't our society even say they have a legal responsibility? They have, what is it they call? They say they have to pay out of their paycheck. Child support, as if that money is going to compensate for not being there as the father. And just understand that little children need both parents. And you go, well, not a little baby. I'm sorry, but yes, they do. When we brought our little baby home from the hospital, I mean, I still remember this. It's this whole crew of, they brought Nina to the car in a wheelchair with one nurse carrying the baby, one nurse pushing her, and another one. So there were 3 nurses bringing her and the baby to the car. And then this was before seatbelt laws. They put her in the car. I pull up underneath the overhang at the hospital. They put her in the car, and they put the baby in her lap, and then they just, all 3 of them stood there waving goodbye. And I looked in the mirror, and I looked at Nina, and I looked at the baby, and I said, we are in big trouble. All the experts are back at the hospital, and we don't have a clue as to what we're doing with this brand new baby. And I started reading books like crazy, and my wife was reading books like crazy, trying to say, what does it mean to be a parent? And along with a family, it not only includes parents, but aunts and uncles, probably grandparents. And by the way, can grandparents step in when there's a child with a single parent for whatever reason? Can grandparents step in and make up for some of that that's lost by the father or the mother not being there? Do any of you have significant relationships with your grandparents just because they stepped up and said, I'm going to be here to help? Or just because they were actively involved in your upbringing? Or do you have aunts or uncles who were a significant part of your life?
I have a friend who, her dad died when we were about 5 years old, her and I were. And her grandparents stepped up, and so did her uncles. And it's almost like as she grows up, they become like her parents. Yeah.
We have a little niece that's the same age as our daughters, and every time we get together at any kind of occasion, what was the last one? Oh, we were at somebody's birthday party. And every time I see her, I say the same thing. I say, this is our 3rd daughter. If if we'd have had another daughter, she would have been our third one. And part of that was because she spent a lot of time at our house, and we deliberately made an effort to have interaction with her because we had 2 girls, and she had 2 brothers, and she was being raised by a single father. And does that help for other extended family members to step up to the plate? So it isn't like it's all lost. It just, you have to understand that. Don't think I can raise this child by myself. No, you can't. You need a family. You need a family. It takes a family to raise children. And family is more important than the village. A village helps, but the family is a very important part of that, which means you better stay connected with your family. Siblings, were any of you born into a family, you're the youngest, and you have a bunch of older siblings who helped raise you? Anybody like that? Oh. There's 5 of us in our family, and my youngest sister, if she thinks I'm telling her what to do, she still goes ballistic on me. What is that all about, people? What was I doing when she was a little child? You don't know the magic word? I was bossing her around. Because I'm higher in the pecking order, and I'm bigger and stronger, and I can tell her what to do. And if she doesn't do it, I can pretty much make her do it. You follow what's going on? Any of you have older siblings helping you grow up? You go, yeah. And sometimes I thank them, and sometimes I don't. It's like, leave me alone. But think from time to time how helpful you could be to somebody, and if you didn't get the help, sometimes I hear this. Well, nobody helped me, so I'm not helping anybody else. Well, where does that philosophy come from? I'm thinking if nobody helped you and you're bothered by it, then overcome being bothered by it by reaching out to others and helping others get through this beginning of life kind of thing. On page 106 to page 1010, it talks about approaches to labor and delivery. In the 1900s, let's see, would that be your grandparents or great-grandparents? Where were your great-grandparents born? Do you know? Or your grandparents born? Probably your great-grandparents were born at home. The doctor came to the house to help deliver the baby. In the 1950s, the middle of the 1900s, you went to the hospital. In the 2000s, you go to birthing centers. Or even if you go to the hospital, they have a separate wing called the what? Maternity ward, where they keep you away from all the sick people to just have babies over there. And then some people are saying, let's go back and have babies at home like we did years ago. And I'm thinking if you could interview your great-grandparents and say, do you think that's a good idea? Some of them would probably say to you, we had our children at home and we didn't have the help of a doctor or a hospital if we needed them. So it's probably best to be close to a hospital when the baby's born so you can get the emergency care if you need it. Because a lot of your great-grandparents, if you know anything about them, they probably had children who died because of birthing complications that could have been kept alive here in the 21st century. Drugs during labor and delivery. You know what? I had a guy one time say to me, I'm going to tell my wife not to take any of those painkillers, just tough it out. And I'm thinking, just have him put his hand out here and let everybody walk over it and say, just tough it out. I'm thinking you better leave that up to her to talk to Don't stand there beside her when she's having contractions and she's having all this pain, and don't stand there and say, it surely can't hurt that much. I'm thinking somebody ought to smack you upside the head with something. Do your homework. Read about this stuff and recognize how agonizingly painful it is. I just said, can I just leave? I don't want to hear this pain. They said, no, you sit here and hold her hand and help her as much as you can. Page 111 talks about what partners do during labor and delivery. Okay, they help. Just sit there and hold her hand. They coach. No, don't do any coaching, Tom. Just, she's on her own. She's got this. She's read all the books. She's got it figured out. Give her emotional support. And then some fathers assist with the birth. I knew better than that because I said, I just fainted watching the film. So that's your specialty, doctor. You take care of it. I'm not interested. And some of my friends who helped said, oh, it was so exciting. I said, fine, you apply to medical school and become an obstetrician. I'm going to just admit that I have a weakness in that area. What happens when the mother and the newborn baby go home from the hospital? What's the first thing that happens? Sleep. This mother has been through an ordeal. She needs to get some rest. Well, who's going to take care of the baby while she's resting? I have my hand up. I'm the father. I'll take care of that baby while you're resting. And in fact, I don't know if the textbook talks about this. I don't think they do. When my wife came home from the hospital, this was a time when a lot of her friends would act like it was no big deal having a baby. And so they would get up and clean the house and start cooking meals and try to go back to their old routine as if nothing had happened. And guess what happened? They ended up back in the hospital. So now they're back in the hospital with complications because their body wasn't getting rested enough to recuperate from this traumatic thing of birthing. So they're back in the hospital, and now the father's at home with the baby, having his mother-in-law come over and take care of the baby, and he's trying to go back between the hospital and home. And I said, Nina, I don't care how competent you are not going back to the hospital after you come home with that baby. So you're going to get all the rest you need. You're going to bed, and there'll be no cooking. I have a whole bunch of frozen dinners in the refrigerator. I mean, do some of you know people who do that today? When someone comes home with a baby, a whole bunch of friends bring meals over. Well, if nobody's bringing meals to your house, then buy a bunch of frozen dinners. And for the guy, I don't care how it tastes. Tell your wife it's delicious. Mm-hmm. And just step up to the plate and be a man so she doesn't go back to the hospital. When mom and baby arrive home, bed rest for the mom with the baby nearby, which means you might need to have to buy a crib to put in there next to her. Meals provided by the husband. Baby care provided by the husband. And child care provided by the husband. Now I put after here, or others, but why wouldn't the husband just do this stuff? Well, I have to go to work. Okay, then maybe you need to have somebody coming in to help. But when our daughters, our two daughters had two little boys born 5 days apart. And my wife was working, and she enjoyed what she did. She worked in a Christian school, and it was a very vibrant ministry. She loved what she did. And I said, Nina, these two daughters are going to have little boys. And they didn't have brothers. So I can't tell you what these little boys are going to be like, but if they have inherited just a tiny bit of my hyperactivity, their mothers are going to have their hands full. So why don't you just quit working to become a full-time grandmother? And she said, I like my job, Tom. I said, okay, then you keep your job. And then when these girls have these two little hyperactive boys and they need help because they can't even take them with them to the store to go shopping, then they will call someone from church to help them. And there'll be somebody else helping your daughter raise the grandchild while you're at school having a ministry with other people's children. And she looked at me and she goes, well, that's not going to happen. I'm going, well, are you going to quit in the middle of the school year and say, sorry, my daughters need me? Are you not going to show up and say, my daughter needs me? She goes, okay, Tom, but if I quit, I'm not going to go back to work. I promise you. I said, that's okay. If we run short of money in our house, I can go get a second job. I'm still hyperactive. And sure enough, we had two hyperactive little grandsons, and these girls just went bonkers with these little boys, driving them crazy. And Nina would just be there, bring them over. She'd go shopping with them, and she'd take care of them. She'd sit in the car with them when they didn't want to take them in the store, and play games with them and spend time with them. And now to this day, here they are, these grandsons are in their 20s, and they just think Nani is so cool and she's such a special lady because she spent all that time with them. And Poppy's just weird, but Nani is really some special kind of lady. And she's so glad she did it because it gave her this special bond with these two little grandsons who aren't little anymore. They're all grown up and such wonderful young men, and she thinks they can do no wrong. Well, too bad for her. Okay, so find someone to help take care of both the mother and the baby, or someone will end up back in the hospital. Okay, let's turn over to page 122 to go to chapter 4. Infants and toddlers. Infants and toddlers. And chapter 4 talks about physical development. Chapter 5 talks about cognitive development. And chapter 6 will talk about their social and emotional development. And what is infants and toddlers? What age group is that? Have you figured out for this chapters 4, 5, and 6? It's birth to 2 years. Have any of you heard any just comments about 2-year-old children? What's the word that goes in front of twos?
Terrible.
Terrible twos. So somewhere there ought to be a chart in the developmental process that says, here's the terrible stage in human growth and development. There is no chart out there. So why do we call it the terrible twos? Here's a little child that's born into a family. You bring them home from the hospital, you put the mother to bed, you tell her you'll bring meals to her, she just needs to get her rest, and she's going to spend all of her energy nursing the little child to feed the little baby. The textbook says that's definitely what needs to be done, is children need breast milk. Does anyone know why doctors today are so insistent that children be nursed, be breastfed as little newborns?
Well, the baby imprints on whoever it's like around the first few hours.
That's the imprinting process is part of it. In fact, and the people who used to sell formula said that's why you want to hold the baby when you give them the bottle, so you can take care of the imprinting process. But the people who sell baby formula are trying to tell mothers that the baby formula is just as good as breast milk. And guess what the research indicates? Wrong. There's something about the way God created a mother that produces all this stuff that goes to the milk that she gives to the child, that helps the child in their first 2 years of life, and especially during the first year of life. And no company making formula has figured out how to adapt their formula to the special needs of children in each little part of the world. But God takes care of that in His process through the mother's body. Even if there's like colds going around and the mother's body produces antibodies to fight off the cold, well, guess what's passed on to the baby through the milk? Antibodies to fight off the cold. I mean, it's just, that's why this textbook and a lot of textbooks say children need breast milk. And I don't know why our society hasn't figured that out. They get all hyper. Some mother gets on a plane with an infant and she's nursing it, and they tell her she has to get off the plane because what she's doing is what? It's offensive to people. I'm thinking the movies they show on the plane are offensive to people. There's nothing offensive about a mother nursing a child, but it tells you, it's a commentary on our society, isn't it? It's a commentary on what's going on in our world and the culture that we live in. So that's why I make such a big deal about this thing, is that they need to be nurtured, nourished. They need that nourishment from their mother. Page 122 makes a statement. It says here, infants begin life completely helpless. By their second birthday, they are running, climbing, talking, and becoming independent. Aha! Now do you see why we call it the terrible twos? So what do you want? Well, I brought the baby home from the hospital. They were completely helpless. And here they are, 2 years old, and they're still completely helpless. What a joy to my heart. No, there's something wrong here. Yes, your child should be what? Running, climbing, talking, and becoming independent. And you call it the terrible twos? I call it just normal life and development. But see what our culture does to it? They give it this derogatory name when the little child is just going through the normal developmental process. And yes, 2-year-olds run into things. Have you ever watched a room full of 2-year-olds? It'll just drive you crazy. It's just like, no, they do. And they run into each other and they fall down. And if we ran into each other like that as adults, we would both be going, oh man, I need to go see a doctor. They jump up and laugh and think, that was cool, let's run into each other again. It's like, no. And it's just normal developmental stuff going on. Climbing. If there were a 2-year-old in this room, if I had a 2-year-old come in the door, he would probably go over there and he would look at this chair, and I'll try to pick it up so you can see it, and he would see that little tear on the side, and what would he do with that?
Okay.
He'd start pulling that white stuff out to see what it was, and when he found out it came off in little pieces, he'd have the whole thing pulled out in no time at all. What is wrong with this child? Nothing wrong with him. You know what I say? What's wrong with you, the adult in the room, who didn't realize what you had on your hands? You have a 2-year-old here. And what are 2-year-olds doing? They were helpless, and now they have all this capacity to be active. They're just being 2-year-olds. And you need to be there to help and say, so what? The 2-year-old, he came over and he started picking at that phone. I'd say, hey buddy, what are you doing? And he'd say, I'm picking at this. And I'd sit down on this chair and where he couldn't get to the phone and say, well, let's play with something else for a while. Let's play with my water bottle. Now what will you do with this water bottle? He'll probably throw it at somebody, or he'll take the lid off and do what? Dump it out. It's just water, people. It'll dry. It'll dry. I sometimes think people value their houses and their carpeting more than they value their children. What is that all about? If you're worried about your fine china, then put it in a box and put it in a storage unit somewhere and buy dishes that little children can't break. Because if you let a 2-year-old eat off of fine china, what will he probably do sometime between 2 and 3? Break some of it. And it's not on purpose. You go, what do you mean on purpose? It is too. He took that cup and he was banging it on the table. He had no idea it would break. Now he does. Look at the look on his face. It just broke. And what does he know? He looks up and you see this scared look on his face because what? He's in trouble. And see, I'm thinking, oh, I'm sorry. I should have given you a plastic cup that wouldn't break like that. Here, be careful. Don't cut yourself. You understand? I'm more concerned about the child than I am about the china. And I live in a world where people think, no, you can't eat in my car. You give a 2-year-old a hamburger and some French fries in the back seat of a car and some ketchup, and what will happen? You don't know? They'll have it all over the car and on you before they're finished. And it isn't like they're trying to make a mess of things. That's just the way 2-year-olds, they're just active. They're just doing that. If you don't want that to happen, well, can I say, just get over it. If you don't want children in your car, then don't buy an old car that's so stained up already it won't matter. You know, people are things. And you know what I've concluded about the culture we live in? Things are more important than people. In our culture, things are more important than people. And to me, that's sad. A little 2-year-old has his own clothes to wear. Does he want to play with grown-up clothes? Yes, he does. And what does he want to do? He wants to drag them across the floor. So, see, that's the beauty of buying your clothes at the thrift store. If you only pay 50 cents for it, it's no big deal if a 2-year-old stains it or ruins it or tears it up. And I'm not talking about just being permissive to let the kids become little tyrants. I'm talking about just understand they're going through some normal developmental stuff. And that means that it needs your constant attention to direct that development and help them to become the people God wants them to be, and not just say, oh, isn't he cute, and then scold him for not figuring out how to live life the proper way. You coach him. You help him learn how to live this life. He goes from being helpless to not wanting your help. Can I help you? And he says, no, I do it myself. And I go, you're probably going to have trouble with that. He wants to pour his own milk out of a gallon jug. Don't have milk in gallon jugs with 2-year-olds. Have it in little pint containers that they can handle. Well, it's cheaper by the gallon. Well, then buy a gallon and pour it in little pint containers so he can pull one of those out and take the lid off. And then if he spills milk, he doesn't spill the whole gallon. He only spills a pint. Just think about, I'm helping this child grow and develop. I'm trying to help them get beyond the infant toddler stage to the next stage of life. Page 122. 11% of babies are born preterm. But of these babies, they account for 67% of the infant deaths. So 11 out of 100 babies are born preterm in the United States. But out of those 11, 7 of them will be, there will be like, what would you say? Out of 100, there will be 67. No, there will be, out of those 11, there will be 7 of them that die in infancy. And out of the other 89%, there will be about 3 who die in infancy. So preterm babies are the ones who are most susceptible to dying as infants. So you say, what's going on? Well, if you look at page 124, it'll show you what's going on. And you can go look at current information and you'll get the same kind of results. That picture at the bottom of page 124. See infant mortality in the United States? And you have to go to Turkey and Mexico and Hungary and Poland to find, to Turkey and Mexico to find infant mortality rates that are way much higher than ours. And look at all the countries that have infant mortality rates much lower than ours. You go, what's going on? And here again, people use this information to talk about health care. It's not health, it's about free health care. It's not the health care that's going on. Why are so many babies born preterm in America? Because we're not giving preterm help to mothers. Or the other side of it is, expectant mothers aren't doing their homework. Remember how I said, if you're going to be a parent, you ought to have to take a license and take a test and get a license to be a parent? Well, guess what? If you're going to have a baby, you ought to have to read a book and pass a test in order to keep the baby you're going to bring into this world, because there are certain things you need to be taken care of. And yes, the hospitals are wonderful at their capacity to take a preterm baby and keep them alive. But why are they being born preterm? What are we doing in our society that keeps the baby from staying in the mother's body for the full time that God intended for them to be there? Probably not eating right, taking care of their health, possibly ingesting teratogens that are harmful. All kinds of reasons. And page 129 is where the textbook says breastfeeding is basically essential. Begin with it in the first hour and continue for at least a year. If you want the best for the child. If you want the best for the child. Okay, do any of you know any new mothers who had a baby and you went to visit them in the hospital and they go, how's it going? And they go, oh, it's going okay. What's wrong? I just fed the baby. And it hurt. Welcome to parenthood. It's going to hurt for the rest of your life to have children. Get used to it early on. Well, I thought this would just all be a picnic. You should have read the book about human growth and development before you got pregnant. It's going to be some painful experiences along the way. Okay, now, can you understand why a few years ago, if nursing my child is painful, then what's the solution to avoid the pain? Put them on formula. You follow the thinking? No. Go ahead and endure the pain and feed the child, at least for the first year of life. And by the time you get home from the hospital, probably you'll toughen up a little bit and you will be able to feed this baby without it being quite so painful. And if it's painful for the first 3 or 4 months or even 6 months or the whole year, then just endure the pain for the sake of your children. Page 136 to 146 talks about a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. Well, page 131, I suppose, is a good place to look at here. See those pictures? Here's a newborn with his head is about 1/4 of his total body length. And then his head just keeps shrinking. No, his head doesn't start shrinking. That's what it looks like in the picture. Well, the picture is misleading. And yes, the head on the adult is smaller than the little baby's head, but his head didn't shrink. If you would have left his head that big, then the adult's picture, you understand what they'd have to do to draw it to scale? The adult picture would take up, almost the whole page. Oh. So that's what's going on. Well, here I thought by looking at the picture, his head was just shrinking. No, it's not. His head stays the same size. Which tells you that when God sends a little child into the world, he sends them with a lot of their brain capacity, their cognitive capacities right there, which says that prenatal children can suffer some serious cognitive difficulties if the mother isn't doing the right thing to help the child become all that God intended them to be. Well, that brain stuff is really cool stuff to read about. But I'm going to jump over to page 136 and talk about vision. Does this surprise you that little kids don't see very well? Research in the middle of page 136 estimates that visual acuity in newborns is between 20 and 150 and 20 and 600. Have any of you been to the eye doctor lately? Had an eye exam? And they said your vision is 20, 150? Anybody? If your vision was 20, 150, you're in serious trouble. You just don't see what's going on. And if it's 2600, you might as well be blind as a bat. And it doesn't bother bats because they have radar to get around. Since we don't have radar, understand that these little kids, their vision, now see, I think this is interesting. They've got this big old head when they're born because their brain is all there. But their vision is in bad shape. So who's going to protect the little kid's eyes until they've grown and developed enough to where they can take care of them themselves? The parents. Which means if you take your little child out in a stroller on a bright sunny day, should you have something over there to keep the sun from shining right directly in their eyes? Yes, you have to be watching out for their eyes. And if it means buying your kid a cool pair of sunglasses, then fine, put them on him to protect the little kid's eyes. But make sure that you're taking care of their vision until their body has developed to the place to where it can work accordingly. And and even adults aren't exempt from this stuff. What did we just have this summer? Did any of you order some of those special glasses so you could look at the eclipse of the sun?
Was that a couple years ago?
Oh, was that 2 years ago?
That was beginning of last year, school year.
Did any of you get little glasses and go watch that?
Yeah.
Did any of you read about companies that were selling faulty glasses?
Yep.
That's so sad. When I went looking for those glasses, I had to find some reputable place where I could buy a whole bunch of them and give them to all my friends. And made sure that they did not let their children look at that thing without glasses, because it'll damage their eyes. And once you damage your vision, you've pretty well messed it up. for the rest of your life. It's not gonna come back when you fry those rods and cones in there. Page 138. So just watch out. Take care of the little child's vision. Page 138 talks about hearing. And what's it say about hearing? Middle of page 138. Researchers have devoted extensive study to infants' reaction to the human voice. Newborns prefer the voices of their own mothers to the voices of unfamiliar females. Is that cool or what? By 2 months, they show a preference for speech with the rising and falling inflections, typical of child-directed speech. You know what child-directed speech is? Okay, I'm talking to you right now. If somebody walked up and said, I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Bonine, but I'm one of your former students, and I have my little baby here, my little child here, my 2-year-old child, and I want him to meet you. And so I'm talking to you like this, and I say, oh, good, well, what a nice little boy you have. And then what happens when I start talking to him? Well, hi, I go into this little sing-songy. Well, hi, little guy, what's going on in your life? And now, sometimes people, do any of you know baby talk? I just can't do that. I just can't handle that. But understand, that's where we as adults consciously or unconsciously make decisions to talk differently to little children. And they prefer that child. I mean, if I talk to a little child like I said, well, hi, little buddy, how's it going in your life? What's going to be his reaction? Whoa, Mom, get me out of here. Mean old man sounds scary. And part of it is that they're not used to that because everybody else is talking to them in a little soft sing-songy way, so they're not used to hearing that. But the other part of it is that some of that is, Tom, tone it down a little bit with little children. Yes?
Is that why when you speak in like a strict voice or whatever, they can tell it's different? Like maybe they're in trouble?
Yeah, they pick up on that. You just call their name. Johnny, where are you? Johnny, where are you? And if you say, Johnny, where are you? He goes, right here, Mom, like you've got a popsicle for me. Johnny, where are you? I'm not going to say. Trouble's on my way. I'm going to hide under the bed, in the closet, someplace where she won't find me. And you understand, it's like, hey, they've got these minds that are driving force in their life, but here's what's going on. At 4 months, they prefer to listen to human voices over silence or white noise. By 5 months, infants can recognize their own names being spoken. At 5 months, they know if you're talking about them, if you're using their name. How cool is that? So apparently, their hearing is better than their vision when they come into this world. Page 139 talks about taste. Whoa, what did they give that little kid to make him make a face like that?
Lemon.
What?
Lemon.
There's a lemon on the table. Who would do that to a little kid?
A lot of people.
What? Why would we do that to a little kid?
People think it's funny.
Well, someone did it to me, so I'm going to do it to the next generation. Let's just be mean to each other. You know, when I was in grad school taking a psychology course, a human growth and development course, and we were talking about children with behavior disorders, and I couldn't believe it when the teacher said this. She said, did you know there are some parents who actually give alcoholic beverages to their little children and then laugh at them stumbling around the room being intoxicated, because it doesn't take much alcohol to create drunkenness in a little child. And by the way, we all know this, don't we? That drunkenness is the state you're in when the alcohol, which is poison, is killing some of your brain cells. So we're going to kill some of this little child's brain cells so we can be entertained? That's just stupid. Well, I didn't know any better. Well, do your homework. Read a book on raising children and realize, don't go around doing stuff like that. I mean, if you want this little kid to trust you, what would you suggest we give him instead of a lemon cut in half? Well, if you were in his shoes, what would you prefer? A pear or a peach? Something that has a mild flavor to it? Why in the world would we do uncomfortable things to little children for our own amusement? That's disgusting. And they also have, well, it says on page 139, infants show taste preferences immediately after birth. Even before their first feeding, when given a sweet solution, they smile and make sucking noises. When they give a sour, they purse their lips and wrinkle their noses. And a bitter taste causes them to spit and make a face. Get rid of it. It isn't good for me. And of course, what should be going into their mouth early on? Their mother's milk. Motor development. Those are their motor skills. What are the two kinds of motor skills? Fine motor skills and gross motor skills. What's that all about? Why do we call them gross? Reflexes. Have any of you ever reached out to a little baby and had them and just kind of rubbed your finger along their arm, and they reach up and they grab a hold of your finger and hold on? Oh, and what do you want to do when a baby's holding on to your little finger like that? I want to take them home. They like me. They don't care who you are. They can't see you. They don't recognize your voice. They're just grasping at whatever. They do that for everybody. Don't let it go to your head. They start crawling. What happens when little kids start crawling around? You ever see a little kid's hands after they've been crawling on a dirty floor?
Got stuff in them.
They're dirty. Well, then let's keep this little child from crawling. No, let's clean the house. And if you have them someplace where you can't clean the house, then when you pick them up, you take that little washcloth out of your pocket that's in a plastic bag and you wash their hands off before your grandmother gives them some stuff to eat. Because when you take them to grandma's house, she probably doesn't clean the floor in preparation for the little baby coming there and crawling around on things. And if the little baby in there crawling around finds a little bug somewhere, what will they do?
Eat it.
They'll probably put it in their mouth.
Get some protein.
And you go, that's disgusting. And I go, why? Have you put a bug in your mouth to see what it was like? You haven't? Or you have? Then how do you know it's disgusting if you haven't done it? I mean, there are people that like bugs so much they roll them in chocolate, right? And eat them for snacks. I'm not inclined to do that, but I wouldn't necessarily call it disgusting. It's just it's beyond the realm of what. I mean, I have enough good things in life to eat where I really don't need to roll an ant in chocolate and consume it. Don't you want to try it? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'll roll a raisin in chocolate, and I can think of other things I'll put in chocolate, but some peanut butter, a Reese's Pieces, wrap that in some chocolate. But you go ahead and eat the chocolate ants, and I'll eat the chocolate-covered raisins and the Reese's Pieces. Okay. What are some of these? Well, gross motor development on page 142 refers to the process of coordinating movements with large muscles in the body. These muscles control the larger parts of the body, such as the head, the neck, the torso. And that's another thing. When you bring the baby home from the hospital, they don't have the strength to control that big old head on their body, so you have to be sure that you hold that up and take care of it. And eventually, this stuff becomes fine motor skills where they can. So a gross motor skill, and maybe that's why we call it gross. A gross motor skill would be a little kid would reach out to grab this jar of water and he would probably knock it over. You follow me? But when he gets fine motor skills, he can pick it up. But until he's developed those fine motor skills, he spills things, he drops things, he breaks things, and he does all kinds of things with it. On page 143 in the middle of the page, be careful about this. Right here in the book, I'm reading a quote from the book. Most infants take their first unaided steps sometime around their first birthday. Now, when it says most, actually, it's more like 40%. So that's not most. Well, 40% do it at their first birthday, but then there's 10% that do it earlier, or out of the other 60%, there's 30% that do it earlier and 30% that do it later. You follow me? So 40% is most of the kids are right around 1 year of age, but some of them take their first step earlier than that, and others take it later than that. Now, do you remember how old you were when you took your first step? Has anyone ever told you how old you were when you took your first step? Okay, let's bring some parents in and line them up here in front, and then let's ask them some questions. Would you rather have a child who took their first step early, or right at the age of 1, or later? What do you think most of those parents, of those 3 parents that I have up here, which one would they prefer? To have their child take their first step early, right at age 1, or later?
I've always heard later.
What?
I've always heard later.
That they would prefer later because?
But when they start standing up to start walking, they don't stop.
They start walking, they get into things, so the longer we can wait, the better. So what? The early walker gets in trouble? And then one of these parents up here says, no, I want my child to take their step before everybody else does. They've got a competitive spirit. I want my child to be first at everything. You know how you can tell those parents when you see them? They see a little kid walking that's the same age as their child, and they say, come on, Johnny, and they hold him up and try to make him walk. I'm thinking all they're going to do is bend the bones in his leg and make the poor kid bow-legged. Give him a break. Let him walk when he's ready to. Don't start it too early. Why not just say, I want my child to take his first step or her first step when they're developmentally ready for it. I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to make a big issue of it. But sometimes the ones who are later, the parents get a little paranoid about it. And that's what you probably ought to say to them, is say, hey, just think about it. If your child starts walking earlier, they're just going to get into more things, so enjoy it while they're waiting to take their first step. And by the way, the ones who take the first step early and the ones who take the first step late, once they start walking, after both of them are walking, you don't see much difference in them, do you? Down down the road. By the time they get to 2, they're all walking pretty much on their own. It's just that where some of them push too much, or where some of them, and see somebody say, well, maybe they weren't pushed enough. I'm not sure you need to push a kid to make them walk. They'll take care of that when they want to. Do any of you know any little kids who just crawled for the longest time because they felt safe on the floor? And then finally, all of a sudden, they see everybody else walking, and they just decide to get up and start walking. But they just didn't. Well, it could be that when they took their first step, have you ever seen a little kid standing there, somebody says, oh, look, he's standing up. Here, come here and I'll catch you. And then he turns around and reaches out to the adult, and the adult backs away and lets him fall on the floor. I'm thinking, give me a big stick so I can walk up behind the adult and whack him upside the head with my big stick. They go, what'd you do that for? I said, what'd you do that for? Well, for fun. For fun. Come on. Come on. Think about what you're doing to these little kids. Poor little kids. Sometimes I observe parents and I'm thinking, Lord, that little kid needs some special help from somebody because those parents aren't giving him any. Walking, I have a note here that 25% by 11 months, another 25% at 13 months, another 10% at 15 months. And that's 60%. So the other 30% are walking at some other time. 20% at 15 to 18 months. It's going to be a while. So from 9 to 18 months of age is the range for walking. Just read the information, do your homework, and don't get troubled about it. Page 146. Cultural differences in early experiences. I think the one that's the most interesting, okay, do we all, and there's a picture of it there, isn't it? Look at that poor little kid tied to that board. Does it tell you why Hopi Indians do that? They call it a cradle board, and they wrap them up in it. Anyone know why Hopi Indians traditionally used a cradle board? What do Hopi Indian mothers do? Just sit around the teepee all day and take care of their little baby. No. The women have to go out in the gardens and raise the crops. So what do you do with that little baby while you're out there? You take them out to the field with you, and you keep them safe and out of harm's way by putting them in this little cradle thing. And what does it tell you on page 146 about these little kids once they get out of these little cradles? They learn to walk just like everybody else. I think sometimes we give Hopi Indians and other cultures a bad time for the way they treat their children. And then on page 147, it talks about the way we treat our children. You go, what's that? Toilet training. Boy, are we ever really hung up on toilet training in this society. And there's no reason to be. I mean, I can see why, back in the age of diapers, when you had to clean them and put them in the washing machine. But now, you don't have to use cloth diapers, do you? What do you buy for these little babies? Pampers? Is that what they're called? You buy them in big boxes. No, you buy them in big boxes if you can afford them. It seems to me like that the way they build those things to help keep the baby from having a rash and all that kind of stuff, we all ought to be using it. Well, I paid so much for this pamper, I'm going to make him wear it all day long. Give me a break. Come on, people. Just go spend the money. Wow, somebody says, you know how much these Pampers cost? And they're standing there smoking a cigarette while they're complaining about the cost of Pampers. Does anyone see a disconnect here? Am I the only one that sees that? Does anyone even know what a package of cigarettes cost? Does anyone know? Is it like $3 a package? So $3 for a package of cigarettes. And are there still just 20 in there? Or do they put 60 in it for $3? So there's only 20 of them. And I understand some people smoke 20 of them in a day. How do you do that? $3 a day times 30 days. I mean, if you just quit smoking, could you afford Pampers for your little baby? And if you really don't smoke and don't drink, and that's the other thing. I mean, I'm at the store checking out, and the lady in front of me is buying some kind of alcoholic beverage, and they just rang it up, and it's like there was one bottle, and it rang up $40, and I thought, they made a mistake. No, they didn't. And she went ahead and paid it. I'm thinking, $40? How many Pampers could you buy with $40? Do you understand how much money we saved just by not smoking and not drinking? We probably save enough money to buy Pampers for all the people in the world who can't afford them, who are willing to quit. I mean, if you say you can't afford them, and you're smoking and drinking, sorry, you could afford it. You just got your priorities out of whack. So anyway, the reason I brought that up is just put Pampers on them and just take care of them till they're kind of ready to start using a toilet. And don't make a big deal out of it. Don't stress. Just give them time. Just like walking and other things, they'll eventually get it figured out. Okay. We're out of here. We'll do chapter 5 on Wednesday.